Um,
Yep.
yeah, so hi, welcome to the Whiskey Lodge cast, as we're calling it now. Um, I am your host, DemiTastes, and I'm joined
Welcome.
by my Whiskey Lodge compatriots, Spooky Chicken and Duckphill Platypus. Um, Today, we're going to be a little more off the cuff. I just got back from Copperworks Distillery, where I was taking a lovely interview from uh, Jason Parker. Uh, Yeah, sorry. I was the problem with sitting in this chair and looking at OBS is like every little thing that goes by the screen is a distraction. Trying to produce while doing an introduction at the same time is just kind of hard.
Oh yeah.
Getting better, but every once in a while I'm just
Yeah,
like I
no, it's
forgot what I was saying. Yeah, so I took an interview from Jason Parker at Copperworks Distillery, which
yeah.
took an hour and a half, and he was very gracious to give me the extra half hour as we had a couple of extra questions to address. And then I also took a distillery tour and got some extra information. I don't know how much of that will end up in a podcast. I'd like to edit that audio down to make it a nice podcast interview. Obviously, that's not ready now because I just walked in my door about 40 minutes ago. Had to deal with traffic on the way back from the distillery, so zero time for editing. In fact, my phone was dead, so my backup audio source isn't even there. Had some technical issues, even in a live
Uh-oh.
interview, or maybe especially in a live interview. I had two audio sources. My portable recorder ran out of batteries in the middle of the interview, and Jason was kind enough to give me a pair of batteries so that we could continue. And my phone caught all of the audio that was interrupted from that recording. And then later on in the interview, I accidentally paused my phone recording, so I only have the portable recorder source. So long story short, I am going to have to do some audio editing. That won't be something I can publish raw because there's going to be five distinct sound files
Yeah.
involved.
Ooh.
Um, so anyway,
That's wild.
for once, I don't have a coffee with me right now. I am just drinking my trusty water to get started. What are you guys having this afternoon?
Um, I finished mine, unfortunately. Uh, so I don't even have an empty cup at the moment.
Fair enough.
Sorry.
Well, I at least have next to me a couple of empty glasses. So I'm just gonna get right in. So today, um, I think we're just gonna go off the
All
cuff,
right.
talk about off the cuff, talk about whatever is top of mind. And of course, the easiest way to get that started is what are we drinking lately? And boy, do I have a bevy of interesting stuff this week. So first of all, behind me up here, I
Oh
have I
yeah.
have received the lovely trio of Lost Lantern American Single
Yes.
Malt Single Distillery
Hey.
Series vatted bottlings. So these are multiple barrel bottlings. We have the Desert Dessert, which is the only one of the three that I've tasted so far from Del Bach. Um, Lost Lantern bottling a multi-barrel
Mm.
blend of Del Bach. That's Desert Dessert. We have Mega Mesquite, which is another Del Bach. And we have Gentle Giant, which one of my favorite distilleries, Balcones. And I'm really
Ooh.
looking forward to this because Balcones single
Mm.
malt in, if I'm not mistaken, some kind of dessert wine cask also. Refill oak and X apple brandy casks. So
Ooh.
not a
Ooh, I don't
dessert.
remember which one it was.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is
Ooh, that's very fun.
yeah. So X apple brandy
Do you
casks.
think is it Calvinist or do they specify?
Uh, this might be one of those wink and a nod. It may very well be Calvados, but it might be one of those things where you can't call it that unless it's bottled in the area. I'd have to go to the website and look up more
Yeah,
details on
Normandy.
this. I'm going to be reviewing these very
Because I'd
soon.
love to know if it was like, yeah, no, I do actually want to pop on a call with you whenever you do taste all of them and talk with you about them some or anything like that. I think that'd be real fun.
Well, if you're ready for that
Don't
now,
know if I'll be able to do that anytime soon.
oh, okay.
Well, I
So,
can I can get the stuff. I'll be right back with you.
okay,
One moment.
could be
You
now.
keep talking, I'll be able to hear both of you.
Yeah, so my
So,
plan is because these are brand new and they took definitely their sweet time getting here, and then I was busy for 4 days, so I took my sweet time getting to opening the first bottle 2 nights ago. Um, Last night, of course, I was doing research on Copperworks by tasting the samples that I have on
Yes.
hand, which I now don't have on hand. They're in another room, and I'm not going to go run to get them. But it was Copperworks 33, which was release number 33, not a 33-year-old, just to be
Mhm.
clear. Copperworks release
Yeah.
number 33 was the ex-sherry bodega cask full maturation, which is an
Ooh.
American single malt sherry bomb. It is so driven by the sherry. It's delicious, don't get me wrong, but compared to the new make, which I had side by side, they feel like almost completely different whiskeys. Whereas in the other Copperworks whiskeys that I've tasted, you can definitely taste the malt character in the new make.
Yeah.
You know,
And
the
the fruity
malt
thread.
influence that is in there. It's a nice, generally nice, really balanced whiskey. I love Copperworks, and the fact that today is the very first day I have had an entire bottle of Copperworks in my possession in my home, because I've been surviving on festival tastes and samples, and I've just had so much Copperworks available to me that I've never actually had to grab a bottle of my own. But since I was there, and this is my first time going to Copperworks Distillery, I have been remiss in not showing up at one of my local distilleries. Um, so while I was there, I bought two bottles. We have release number 46, which is according to Jason Parker, is the first, probably, as far as he knows, and as far as I know, this is the first American whiskey that is grain all from a salmon safe farm.
Interesting.
So it is a single grain variety.
Salmon safe, you said.
Yes, not necessarily organic, but salmon safe, meaning that whatever they do on the farm is not harmful to the habitat of the salmon, the rivers they spawn in, and so on. This
We'll
was
probably do a
absolutely
deep dive
delicious.
into the organic stuff at some point, but
Yeah, biodynamic. Salmon safe is a brand new one to
I can only
me.
imagine. I need to try some.
And I also grabbed this
Yeah, I was
single
looking at
barrel.
Copperworks' website yesterday before this interview.
Yeah, go ahead. I think our audio is actually slightly more out of sync than we were when we did the
Single
sound check.
barrel?
Yeah, you seem to be a few seconds behind. Do you want to rejoin the call, maybe?
Yeah, no, our audio seems to be a little bit more out of sync, which is interesting. We'll figure that out sometime.
I'll wait for him to catch up.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Hopefully it's going to be better
Hello.
now. It was just funny to me that you were,
Hopefully it's going
you may still
For a
be really
second, you
behind.
were
We were-
Doug's dog.
to be in sync before the stream started.
We were. We actually thought about this and we tried.
We were perfect. It was all great until the stream started. But so I was
How it
on the
goes.
Copperworks website the other day. They seem to do a lot of stuff with local things. But they did mention on their website that they were all local varieties of malt within about 500 miles. They're trying to do a lot with sort of both the environment and the local community and things like that. Seems like a really interesting right now. Yeah, we'll have to look more into this, sort of like a lot of the places that are going on with this movement, things like the organic movement and the salmon safe movement, also a new one to me, super interesting, but very important up where Copperworks is, I believe.
Uh-oh.
Whoop. Have I cut out again? Oh no, is Doug dead? Did Doug die?
Well, I'll talk
Oh,
if,
Phill. Wait.
Oh, am I out?
Oh. Yeah, let's talk. I don't know what happened to Doug.
No,
no.
my headphones.
Hey, Doug.
My headphones lost the connection to
Uh-oh.
the
Oh,
computer.
okay.
So yeah, I had to do a little quick reset on everything. Oh, by the way, do you guys have your backup audio recordings going?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Good, because we're gonna need them today. Today's
Here.
freaking
Today's
mess.
a little bit rough.
Oh yeah, we're gonna need them today.
Oh,
quick
man.
and rough one. I do like the much more casual vibe we got going on here, but yeah. So tell me more about this Copwork single barrel that you had mentioned and all that.
Yeah, the single barrel hair of the dog Adam cask. So as I just learned today, unfortunately,
I was so interested when I saw that.
the hair of the dog
Did you
brewery.
say? Oh damn.
The hair of the dog brewery has gone out of business, or has closed down. The brewer has retired and did not sell. So you can still get hair of the dog, but only for a little while. And so Copperworks had a few
Might have to order some then.
yeah, Copperworks had a few barrels of this, and they have finished. So this is a nice cloudy. It's not often that you see a real cloudy whiskey released
Mm-hmm.
commercially. You can't really pick it up on the camera, but there is for sure
Yeah.
not necessarily sediment,
Right.
but a certain cloudiness to this. The beer that actually came from the barrel in the finishing process, and this is a delicious whiskey that is definitely in the dessert category. That to me at the distillery reminded me of cherry cordial candy, the ones the the chocolate thing that
Yeah.
has the
Ooh.
cherry and the syrup all inside of it, which some people hate those, and I
Oh,
depends
I
on the day.
love those things. Oh
Depends on the
man.
day. For
Yeah.
me, definitely.
That's fair.
Cherry and chocolate, best combination.
Yeah, so like sometimes when it works, it really works, and then sometimes
Second
it's
only to
like
raspberry and chocolate.
if you're in a chocolate box and you're not and how could you not be expecting the cherry cordial because they have that shape?
Yeah.
But if you if
And
you open
it's the
up
Always,
classic.
every time.
if you open up a box of chocolates and you have something that surprises you with a big gush of liquid in the middle that you weren't expecting, that can be unpleasant. So
I
I
suppose it
guess
depends upon the liquid
So,
too.
actually, speaking of that, quick aside. So we had a comment in the whiskey lodge earlier this week. I saw it but didn't actually respond to it, and asked what our first experiences with whiskey were.
Ooh, yeah.
Do any of you want to talk on that? Because my experience is actually very Christmas one time, and and apparently they were whiskey and absinthe chocolates,
Oh.
just with straight liquor inside of them, like they were fully alcoholic. It was one of the best chocolates I've ever eaten, honestly. But that was my first real experience with whiskey when I was by just eating them by accident when I was a bit younger. Um, but but then, so yeah, what were yours? I'm actually really interested to hear about that.
I would actually say similar.
Oh,
Well,
really?
when you say first experience with whiskey, um, so I would say mine is a
Hmm.
multi-phased approach. I actually I had a few minutes of conversation
Sure.
about this with Jason Parker earlier. Um, I started off drinking bourbon, but like because it was what Dad drank, and we would have a drink together sometimes. Um, this is I was, and I'm not just putting up a front here. I did not drink anything but a sip of champagne on New Year's Eve until I was 21. I was
Sure.
very much on that side of the line. Like this thing's illegal, it's bad for me. I'm not going to do it. I'll wait until the law has decided I'm the proper age, and then we can get into it. So somewhere around the age of 21, I started gradually getting into wine and beer. And I think I was about 23 before I really thought of whiskey as something that I would want to drink ever. And I had some Wild Turkey bourbon. Um, Liked it a fair amount. Ping ponged between that and Maker's Mark and Jack
Good
Daniels,
place to
and
start.
found that Wild Turkey was the one that I liked the best, and so that's the thing that I mostly kept around. Occasionally switched to Maker's Mark. Every once in a while, I would try something funky, and by funky I mean different, like the Trader Joe's bourbon. And that was kind of it. Like I was just
Yeah.
sometime around 2018. Um, Never really got into wine. Like I didn't really get the whole thing. Like wine is this thing that has these flavor. Like wine for me, even to this day, to a large extent, wine tastes like wine. Beer I got really into though. I loved all the different
Yeah, we'll
styles.
have a talk about that sometime.
Please, yeah. I mean, I'm more enlightened now about wine than I was then. Um,
Yeah.
but it took developing a palate for whiskey to develop a palate for wine, if it makes sense. And part of the thing that was preventing me from really
That
getting
makes a
into
lot of
wine,
sense. Yeah.
wine is uh, the problem with wine for me. I'm the only person in my house that really drinks it all. Even when I had roommates, it was just
Yeah, that is a problem.
so with wine, you open up a bottle of wine and you've got, and for me, my standard serving of wine is what most people would consider half a glass. So it takes me
Hmm.
7 or 8
Sure.
glasses to go through a bottle of wine, which means it's not at its best by the time I finish one bottle, let alone opening up two to
Hmm.
compare.
Yeah. No, it's a tough one. Wine, especially. I think that's one of the reasons why people find it really hard to get into it is not only a somewhat large monetary investment like it is for whiskey to some extent, it's also just a very large and like test on things like your liver and your stomach and just sort of being able to even finish a bottle if that's what you want. It's unless you have
And
people with you, it's hard to get into.
and another thing to consider is that different people taste things differently, and a lot of wine to
Mm.
me just tastes like grape juice that's gone off. And I've talked to people who
Sure.
are astounded that, oh, you taste this wonderful wine. I can't remember what it was that I tried at a friend's house at a party. A fairly expensive bottle of wine, and it tasted like Welch's gone sour to me.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's a weird thing about expensive bottles of wine too, because and we'll probably talk to some greater length about this at some
Yeah,
point, but some of
expensive
them
doesn't
will
always mean
just
better.
taste worse to a lot of people. Right, exactly. They'll be different. They'll be
Hmm.
somehow stranger or more prestigious, but they won't really be better. Actually, that's a fairly common thing on a lot of stuff. More expensive wine isn't better to the average consumer, especially. It doesn't really taste better. It has weird flavors going on in it
Yeah.
sometimes, and that's a little bit less palatable to a lot of people. Yeah, it's very interesting.
So,
But in any
um,
case, DemiTastes, sorry to interrupt you.
oh
Or
yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
Phill.
so like
Yeah,
long story. I guess I'll try to keep it short because we've got all three of us to go through. So yeah,
yeah,
I whiskey was mostly bourbon for me. And then and for like a long time. I want to say probably 4 years or something like that. The world of whiskey was really narrow, and it was just at some point it was just an ingredient to have on the cocktail bar. And I was more
yeah.
interested in the different kinds of spirits because I was interested in ingredients for cocktails, which is mostly how I drank spirits back when I first got into it, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And the unitary thing that I
Absolutely.
felt was my range of experience, like something that has a range to explore, was beer. Everything from stouts to IPAs and the barrel finished stuff and the flavored stuff, and like there's just a wide range there. So when I went to Japan in 2015, and everybody was talking about the Japanese whiskey at the time, but it hadn't quite blown up in price yet. So I got a couple of bottles of Yamazaki 12 as gifts and had some there in Japan. And I was like, this is great. It's like it's delicate, it's flavorful. It doesn't burn the way that my experience with Scotch was Dewar's White Label and Johnny Walker Red Label, which were both disappointing. And I kind of said like, I don't like cheap Scotch, and expensive Scotch is expensive, so I can't get into
Yeah.
that right now. So maybe Scotch is just not for me, but this Japanese whiskey thing, that's cool. And then that was sort of the thing that sat in my top shelf, and I touched like once a year uh, for a few years. It was just the holidays and special gatherings with friends. I think we may have lost Ian.
Uh-oh.
Do you want to ping him and see if he's having internet problems?
Yeah. Stand by.
Casual
I'm
streams, real rough today.
yeah. Well, while we're waiting, my first experiences with whiskey are sort of stolen sips here and there.
Hey there,
Um,
fascinating thing.
aha.
Complete internet just went out for there for a
Ooh.
moment. Not sure what happened, but hopefully it doesn't happen again. But we'll find out. Uh,
Well,
Excellent.
I think I'm gonna just continue. You've heard my story before, so I'm not gonna
no, I
repeat it for
actually
your benefit.
heard most of that up until the point where you said, "I think we've lost Ian."
Oh, okay.
Um,
Okay,
yeah,
so you just lost your video before we waited. Okay, that's good. That's
yeah,
good.
no, yeah.
All right. Well, okay, so Japanese whiskey, and then that was kind of it's sort of the mostly untouchable bottle. Um, and then I got really into cocktails for a while actually. And it was like I've got some. I went to the Symphony of all places and ordered a Manhattan, and they were like, "Would you like to upgrade to Bullet Rye?" Which feels kind of it feels kind of like in a way coming back to like the small core of brands that most people get introduced to. But at the time, I had
Sure.
never heard of. Bullet Rye, and I was like, sure, upgrade sounds good. I'll pay an extra couple of bucks, and that was a delicious cocktail. So it was sort of in that
Bullet
moment.
Rye Manhattans are still really, really good.
Yeah,
I don't really drink much Bullet like straight, but oh dang, the Manhattans are nice.
yeah. I actually
Say
keep
what you
around.
will about MGPI, they do
Ooh.
make very good whiskey.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yep, I may not be the biggest fan of the MGP 95.5 rye as far as, um, and that's for people who don't know, that's 95% rye, 5% malted barley is a mash bill. That's the most famous product that comes out of MGP, which is a producer for that sells their whiskey to non-distiller producers and has a couple of brands that they release under as well. Um, so it's not that all MGP 95.5 rye tastes the same, but Bullet in particular is very like very herbal eucalyptus, pretty much one note and a half, kind of as far as the profile goes. Like
Yeah.
it tastes like some kind of rye spice that's a pretty one note thing, and barrel, which is a pretty one note thing. And if you put it in a cocktail, kind of like what we were talking about with Stranahan's, like Stranahan's is really good at being a very intricate kind of honey, and that's the profile. And you put that into a cocktail and work with it, it works
Yeah.
really well. Kind of the
Oh,
same
it
is
does.
true of
Almost
other
automatic.
one note whiskeys like Bullet Rye. So anyway, that was my experience with upgrade whiskey, and so going from whatever the well rye was to the Bullet Rye, and going like, oh, like if you upgrade the whiskey in a cocktail, it makes a big difference, and that sort of got me looking at upgraded spirits for the home bar. And I came up with this plan where I was like, okay, every time we're going to have a gathering with friends, I will buy a new spirit and a new mixer and add to the inventory of the cocktail cart and build up an inventory of recipes that I can make as cocktails. I wasn't trying to get into bartending or anything. I just wanted to build out
Mhm.
my home bar.
I don't
Yeah.
know what I thought when you said mixer, but for some reason I was fully convinced that you were fully buying like new KitchenAids
Stand
every single
mixers.
time.
The stand mixer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a
I don't know why
liqueur.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like buy a new vermouth or buy bitters or buy I don't know, just lemon juice even, right? Like I didn't get so far as to buying Campari before I discovered that I really liked spirits neat, but that's part of the story here. So I started looking into upgrade spirits and figuring how to budget that out. If I get together with my friends once a month and I allocate, I don't know, $60 to buy something mid-shelf in terms of a spirit, could be whiskey, gin, whatever, brandy, mezcal, which brings me to the next phase of this whole thing. So going along with that plan didn't last very long. I think I did about 3 or 4 cocktails before I went with my buddy to a liquor store and found a mezcal, which was Hikaru Reposado, which is kind of like a larger brand, and Reposado may not be like the purest expression of agave, as far as agave in theory, agave enthusiasts think in theory.
I
But the
think a
fact,
reposado is a perfectly fine one. Come on
oh,
now.
I do too. In fact, I quite like a Reposado, which and that
Oh yeah.
so Reposado for the audience who may not know,
Hmm.
Reposado is like so tequila is generally speaking a white spirit or a colorless spirit. It has not been aged in wood.
Very beautiful white spirit.
I mean, a clear spirit looks like a clear spirit, but it tastes much more complex than
Hmm.
something like vodka. So a really good tequila, and I didn't learn this until much later because tequila was another one of those things where it's like tequila is for shots and cocktails.
Yeah.
A lot of them are cheap in one note, and you kind of don't think about them beyond that. So mezcal though um, is similar. It's another agave spirit. It is not tequila. It's similar in concept. It's typically more traditional practices, the way that they harvest the um, the agave. It's not necessarily blue agave. Um, the way that they cook the agave, which sometimes is in sort of an open kiln, so it develops these sort of smoky flavors. Not the same kind of smoky as Scotch, but
Hmm.
when you put that smoky
Very
flavor,
vegetal, very different.
yes, yeah, it's sort of like roasted poblano peppers.
Yeah,
Is
but
the
like
experience that I've had.
barbecue in there, but yeah, those poblano pepper flavors are real good explanation of it. Yeah.
Obviously, like any spirit, it's going to vary from expression to expression what it tastes like. So anyway, we go to the store and buy this Reposado mezcal and take it back. And I'm like, I don't know what cocktails to build with this, right? Like I have an app on my phone that's going to tell me what ingredients I have and how to make a cocktail out of it. I was just like, I feel like buying a mezcal. Like I've heard that recently. This was back in 2018, I think, maybe 2019. Um,
Yeah.
so might have even been 2020 it was Super Bowl weekend. So it was like maybe right before we
Yeah.
figured out that the pandemic was going to be a thing. Um,
Yeah.
it might have been the last
Yeah.
spirit I bought
Good
before
times.
lockdown, on Super Bowl weekend, like early February.
And this
Or
is still at the start of your sort of like journey into like really enjoying whiskey and things like
so
that.
with all of that background out of it, for me, it was complicated, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't
Right. No. Yeah. Yeah.
it wasn't I like
That's
drinking.
also significantly more recent than I was expecting it to be. Honestly, it felt like you'd been into this for a long, long time.
I will say this. When I get into things, I get really into
Ooh.
things. I have that sort of
Leaping off into the deep
single-minded.
end.
Yeah. So, um, how to say this in a way that doesn't make me sound like a slacker? Um, my job was not challenging me to the point
Ah.
for in around that period of
Yeah.
time, in around the pandemic time. Um, my job was not particularly challenging to me outside of I put in the diligent 8 hours a day, but I was not in a phase of my life where I felt I needed to put in 10, 12 hours a day and think about my job outside of work, right? I was definitely later hours than most, right? I was more like an 11 to 7. That was my software engineer schedule. Um, but that was pretty much it. I would do my job, I would go home and do something else. When I was not at my job, I was researching everything I possibly could about spirits, talking to everyone I could, learning everything that I could, tasting everything that I could, budget allowing, and making friends that would allow me to taste, because they also had collections of their own that would allow me to taste more things, and building up quite a vocabulary of tasting notes and tastes of expressions. So basically, I took it upon myself to do another full-time job worth of research between the weekends and the 4 to 6 hours a day that I wasn't at work or doing anything else. Um, just putting in the hours of doing the research and doing the writing, if that
That's
makes sense.
okay.
But all
No.
that
Yeah. That makes a
prelude
lot
that
of
I
sense.
gave
Yeah.
you was
Yeah.
that mezcal was the foot in the door that like I was like, oh, this is a smoky spirit that I like.
We'll
Maybe I
have to do like a mezcal and tequila and sotol tasting sometime. Yeah, yeah, because I've got access to quite a fair few of them around here. I'll see if I can't get some to you all sometime, and all that, because I'd love to have a chat with you about those and sort of the history of those and that. Yeah,
I have.
your history, that is to say.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna change that slide back to the because we're not talking about American Single Malt right now. I still have the
Nah, we're not. We're not. We're talking about a lot of stuff.
yeah,
Actually,
let's get rid
before
of
I
it.
do head out, I do actually want to hear a lot more about this and both your history and philosophy on whiskey. So, more in the future, Doug. But before I have to head out today, I would love to hear Phil's introduction to whiskey and sort of his story as well.
So mine is a lot simpler. I sort of stole
Mhm.
sips here and there from various places.
Yeah.
Um, but my real introduction to whiskey was my 21st birthday. I impulse bought a bottle of Dewar's 12-year-old. I believe it was at that point Blender's Reserve, the
Ooh,
12-year-old in the
nice.
blue label. Um, and it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Um, and sometime between then and my 22nd birthday, I bought myself a bottle of Ardbeg 10,
Ooh.
which, fun fact, you can't see it at the moment, but it's on the shelf right above my shoulder. It's not the same bottle, but it's the same box because I'm a nerd and I thought that'd be cool. Um, but what really started my journey on enjoying good whiskey was my older sibling introduced me to Catoctin Creek, which is a small distillery out of Purcellville, Virginia. They make, in my personal opinion, some of the best rye whiskey being produced today. It is 100% organic rye,
I second that opinion.
and it is one of the few things that I always have a bottle of. And sort of the discovery of Catoctin Creek, or the introduction of Catoctin Creek, sort of led me down a rabbit hole of trying whiskeys. And I want to say uh, 5, 6 years ago, I think it's probably about 6 years ago, I started like really delving into like trying whiskeys and writing notes and reviewing whiskeys and sort of discovered that there wasn't a lot of like the like interesting picking apart, really looking at, lower end whiskeys. So for a while that's what I focused on, was like Jack Daniel's Jim Beam expressions, which is why I have such a complete collection of the Jim Beam lineup. um and you just sort of comparing that to craft whiskey, and in particular Virginia craft whiskey, because that's where I'm from, and supporting the local distilleries is really important to me, because if you don't support them now, they won't get to a point where they can produce a product as cheaply and efficiently as Beam can. So,
Support them when they're bad, so you can support them when they're good.
right, and they're not even bad. They're
They're
just
not, yeah.
they're just maybe lacking a little bit in age, and the
Yeah.
bones are there to be good stuff. The cuts are right. The the sort of passion that they have for their product is right. A good example of that is this stuff. Falls Church Distillers. This is the Church Bourbon Whiskey. Um, it
It's so
is.
wild to me that I never even knew they were there when I lived like a town over.
Oh yeah. Um, I mean, they're relatively young. I can't remember when they were founded. Um, but they do a lot of interesting things. Like, I got to try a spelt whiskey from them.
Oh,
Um,
spelt, that's awesome.
and I got to try it at 120 proof,
Ooh.
as the proof that it was going into the barrels and coming out of a couple months later. At that point in time, it was just a sort of an in
Yeah.
progress sample. Um, but this stuff is bottled at 40%. It is a little bit rough, but it's got the bones of being exceptional stuff.
Yeah.
It just needs a little more time. And time is something that you can't cheat, and craft distillers just don't have enough of. They
Yeah.
can't say, let's let this barrel rest for another, couple of years, because they may only have 100 barrels laid in to age.
Yeah.
Jim Beam has literally hundreds of thousands, probably.
No,
I
it's
don't know
it's
how many they
insane.
actually have.
I want to do a tour of Jim Beam someday because their production
Oh, absolutely.
system sounds amazing.
And yeah, there's so much variety in craft spirits. You've got Catoctin Creek, who make some of the best rye I've ever had, who are aging in 30-gallon barrels. I think that they're using Michigan white oak barrels.
Hmm.
Fantastic stuff. They release it at
Beautiful.
40, 46, and cask strength. Um, and then you've got Bare Knuckle, who make a rye, a bourbon, and a wheat whiskey, which you don't see every day.
Not always. Fun stuff though. Fun stuff.
And their stuff, even as young as some of this is, we're talking like 38, 39 months. The oldest of the ones sitting over here next to me, I think, other than the two bonded ones, is the wheat whiskey at 49 months. We're talking about things that are their age is measured in months, and I would say that they go toe to toe with a lot of the big guys. And I've derailed the conversation to talk about like
Hey, don't
small craft
worry.
distilleries, but
No,
Don't
that's
worry,
sort of
I'm
the
also a shill for
focus.
Virginia distilleries. I respect that.
Yes.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
I think my favorite right now, just based on what I've had, is Copperworks. I have not actually had
Sure.
Catoctin Creek yet,
Oh
and
yeah, no, we'll
We
Virginia
we'll
can
have
pitch
to
Distillery
we'll
that.
have to
Company.
taste some of that together. We really need
I
to because
have
it's some
I
good
have
stuff.
every sample of American single malt that I have on the desk next to me because I was organizing things 6 months ago and never put them away. So here I have a Virginia Distillery Company cider cask,
Ooh.
Yes, it's so good.
I think
which, if I'm
I
not mistaken, well, I have a Stranahan's cask strength, and um, I don't know if this
Yeah.
is also I don't, it's not a cider cask, but for some reason I
Mm.
thought I had more than one cider cask to compare.
Tough to find cider casks. Very good flavors though. Very nice.
I wanted to
Before I
go back
Oh yeah, go
and
on.
do another quick tangent. Phill,
yes.
you mentioned that you developed your beam collection when you were early on. Um,
Mm.
I relate so
Yes.
hard to that because when I got this started, remember I was saying that my goal was to build
Yeah.
mid-shelf, upgrade but not super expensive cocktail tier whiskey.
Hmm.
And so what my initial thrust on getting into reviewing whiskey was for the purposes of recommending to my friends what is good and what is not in cocktail tier whiskey prices. And
Yes.
so when I first started reviewing whiskey, I was going to Total Wine and buying like 4 bottles at a time once a month and trying things that were in like the 20 to $30
Okay.
range, most of which were pretty good and like worth
Oh
what I
yeah.
paid for them.
Oh yeah.
And some of which are sitting untouched in my closet to this day, 3 years later,
That's wild.
because I would rather drink something else, right? They're not bad.
Yeah.
I just would
They're
rather
not
drink
bad,
something
but
else.
they don't reach out and grab you.
Yeah.
Um,
So
I
before I go on, Phil.
I started doing the like middle to low end reviews because there was sort of a weird void in the reviews on Reddit and
Mm.
other places where people were talking about the good stuff, the special stuff, the stuff that's ooh, it's a limited release. Oh, it's you know, I mean, even like the reviews of like the mid to high ish tier scotches sort of were above what a lot of people that I knew were asking me questions about, and that's why
Yeah.
I hit the like mid shelf really hard for reviews because that was an underserved category.
Completely
Um,
agree.
No, yeah, this is why I love you two because you two really are quite interested in and sort of all these sort of smaller, littler aspects of the of all the whiskeys that you have, and it's really sort of turned me on to some stuff that I didn't necessarily really know that much about before. Like say, I've never actually had doers, for instance, but with it
mhm.
being such a sort of big part of both of your experiences, both negative and positive. I'm really interested to actually see what it's like. Honestly, yeah.
Oh,
I'm really fascinated by your approaches to this. Actually,
and
So
Doers
with
has
all
a
that
lot of
said, I
interesting
actually
stuff.
think that for all the words that we can say about ourselves, Ian, I think you have the most interesting direction into the world of whiskey, and
Yes,
I would love if you would share that for our audience.
right.
yes.
So, oh gosh, where do I start with this? So I'll start. Technically, the story starts a little bit before I was born. My dad was back in the '90s. My dad
All right,
was
hang on a sec. Let me grab a book. No, I'm just kidding.
back in the '90s. My dad was worked at a wine shop in Northern Virginia before my brother and I were born, and he would let's see. He would tell me about wine after I was born. He became more of a stay-at-home dad. I would tell me about wine every once in a while. The first time we'd had this whole conversation about it, what made it interesting was, if I remember rightly, over I want to say it was either it was a French Pinot Noir. So I want to say. Oh, I don't remember if it was from any particular place, but I believe it was a French Pinot Noir or something like that. It had some weird tasting notes. But he would tell me all about this back when I was 11. Um, so I sort of grew up with this idea of what I kind of wanted sort of look at, the world that I want to see, and it was very heavily closely related to. Um, Not just alcohol itself, but the way that alcohol interacts with both history and the cultures that it's made by, and the areas that it's made by. More specifically, these very minute, distinct details and how people sort of think about them. And then I this is a weird part of the story. If we're getting really into the weeds, then an anime came out called Shokugeki no Soma,
Oh, I love
and
that one.
it
Yeah.
made cooking very, very fun. It made the idea of being a chef,
Yes.
not a very fun job in and of itself, look very fun.
Yeah.
And so I got really into the restaurant industry after a while. And then I got kicked out of college for the first time. Um,
This is part of the
and what
story I didn't
happened
hear
was
before.
no, yeah, I got kicked out of college twice. We'll talk about that sometime. And what happened was, I went to college. I had like a nervous breakdown and stopped going to class, and they kicked me out. But so I got really, really into the restaurant industry and wine especially. I took my sommelier exams and such, and I just got so into I think we all here in this call have some form of ADHD.
Yes.
But like both of you, I hyper focused on this thing, on just knowing as much about this topic as I possibly could. So I would just read books about wine and explanation of areas like for hours a day at sometimes, and just sort of learn as much about this as I could. And I wasn't as much into whiskey. I learned it because I was interested in cocktail and the artistry of making things like this, and I knew some about whiskey. I knew what was, probably pretty decent to order at a restaurant, things like that, but nothing really about what it was. At this point, it was all wine, and I really wanted to know about these smaller types of wine from Mexico, wine from Canada, wine from some of the states in the United States, like sort of Eastern Europe and things like that, all these sort of lesser known styles. And then as COVID started to happen, the industry got a lot harder to sort of make a living in. To restaurants shut down. I lost some of my jobs there, and I was alcohol was still considered an essential industry in Virginia at the time. So I was working all throughout that and just sort of studying, learning as I could. Eventually, it got a little bit hard to live in the area that I was in, sort of outside of DC, and I moved over to Idaho for a little while. And that was in the middle of Mormon country. There wasn't that much alcohol to go around. There wasn't that much to do. Took kind of a break from the whole thing. And when I sort of got back into it, I was about to move down to Arizona, and I didn't know much about the wine industry in Arizona. Turns out it's a little bit more robust than I would have imagined, but we'll talk about
Hmm.
that sometime maybe. And then as I came down to Arizona, I got sort of hired at a distillery, Whiskey Del Bach, and I just sort of started reading books about whiskey, reading books about history about whiskey, sort of doing as much as I could to learn a lot about the process more so, rather than just the drinking it. And I was drinking pretty decent whiskey at that point as well, just because I enjoyed some of the stuff. But my primary way of sort of finding out about these notes, finding about the notes of a lot of things. I didn't get into coffee
Mhm.
until after I was into wine. I didn't really get into sort of actually tasting things, sort of looking at things with a more critical eye until I got much more into wine right there. And there's a lot of minutia about the story. The first actual whiskey I had was because some friends of mine back in college started scratching like cats on my door at 2 a.m. and then popped into my room with a bottle of, this is back when they did this bottle, Highland Park 20 year. And
Ooh.
that was a good
Oh.
experience, I would say. I hated the stuff the first time I tried it. Could not stand the burn of it.
Okay. Common
But it
experience then.
really, really grew on me. Yeah.
I think
That was a lot of my story. We can get into some
a
more
lot of
fine
people
details
will
and things like
relate.
that. But yeah,
Yeah, sorry for cutting across you, audio delays.
no worries at all. Do it
Um,
more often.
yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea.
Just don't let me talk.
Just utter chaos. Let's not let anybody talk on this thing. Um, I think a
Yeah.
lot of us can relate to the idea of the first time you've had whiskey. It's kind of an
Oh.
unpleasant experience in the mouth, right? There
Oh
may be
yeah.
something there with the flavors or whatever. You might find it with whiskey on the rocks or whiskey in a cocktail, and you say there's something there. But whenever I have it neat, or like when they first pour it in the rocks, or I do an old fashioned or something, there's something about it that's just really hard. the drink. You learn techniques. First of all, it's just exposure. I was reading whose book was it? The
Remember,
it was
hard
tasting.
alcohol is just always God's little reminder that he is here and he does hate you a little bit.
And therefore we drink whiskey to get closer to God.
Oh,
Something like
absolutely.
that.
If you drink too much whiskey, you might think you're getting closer to God.
Yeah.
Something BAC over 1%.
Yeah. Oh my
Mm,
gosh.
let's not get into that. That doesn't sound
Yeah.
survivable, but let's not get into that.
No, it definitely
One
isn't.
1% is not survivable.
No. I think it's like 0.4% is not survivable,
Yeah.
That's
typically
1%,
speaking.
and
I think you
0.4%
would
is five
not be
times
able
higher than the
to.
legal limit.
Yeah.
I don't believe that 1% would be like physically doable based on your
No.
stomach's capacity.
No.
But I'm
Oh,
not
no.
sure.
I don't know. I don't want to get into it. In general, we
Nah.
advocate safe drinking, so it's safe to say that
Oh,
you
yeah. Yeah,
Drink safely.
absolutely.
you should be well on this side of any sort of problems like that if you're drinking
Yeah.
responsibly. Um,
Yeah.
and drinking responsibly is for me, it's about two or three of this size of drink a day, if
Yeah.
that. And by a day, I mean on a drinking day, which is only about 3 or 4 days a week.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally
Um,
apropos of nothing.
yeah.
I went ahead and reached for the second oldest scotch that I've gotten reached, but the one that I can easily
Ooh.
Okay,
access.
okay. Are we doing this now? We're breaking out the old scotch because I have a couple.
Oh, I don't got old scotch. I don't got anything. I like drinking
I've
young
got something
things.
that can trump everything you've got. No, I just
Let's see.
because
I mean, the oldest things I
dimensional vault
have
stuff.
are Armagnac. The Armagnac is still a good value
Mm,
over 30 years old. You can get stuff in
yeah, it
40,
is.
50
Oh
It's
yeah,
years old range. That's pretty good.
surprisingly good value.
I
Don't
I
tell anyone.
do.
Yeah, don't tell anyone, especially not on a
Oh yeah,
podcast
yeah.
broadcasting to the entire internet for anyone to find.
Oh yeah, definitely not.
Wait, wait, wait,
Um,
wait.
hold
We're
up.
not doing one of those right now, are we?
I do have a bottle of 42-year-old single grain scotch.
Holy shit, really?
Yes. It was
Well, you got
a
my single grain beat, and I've got a 29-year-old.
it was a I want something that's older than I am and that's rapidly becoming just non-feasible at my age
Yeah.
in the
Hmm.
single malt category. And I was looking at single grains because I'd never had one. And I was sort of going into it with well, this is a really expensive gamble to take. And I'll just keep my expectations low. I'll share it with my friends at the Burns Supper. It's actually very good.
Huh?
It's uh, Gervin distilled in 1979, bottled in 2021. It's different, um, but really good. I don't know that it's worth what I paid, but I
Hmm.
enjoy it, and I think that's all that matters.
Yeah, no, totally. All right, you two, I'm going to have to head out here. And this has been an awesome conversation. I've really been
Hmm.
enjoying this today. But I will catch up with you two this coming week. We'll discuss what's going on. And have a nice day, both of you. Have a nice Thursday evening.
See?
Will do, and you do the same.
Thank you so much.
Well, all right. Are we gonna let me switch to just the Discord call for my face isn't on that one.
Oh,
Hmm. Do we have anything? Uh, Here, let's do this. I've got you and me with a blank in the middle.
that's all right.
I don't have a larger size of our faces for that, but that'll do. Do you want to sign off here, or should we keep talking for a little bit?
Well, I just want to take this opportunity to promote myself a little bit. I'm running
Yeah.
the Virginia Whiskey Tournament
Yes,
this
that was
summer
so much fun
again.
last year.
Um, I'm doing it bigger and better this year. I'm working on making arrangements to get a barrel stave from Falls Church Distillers LLC because they were the champions of 2022, and I'm going to incorporate a chunk of that into the 2023 trophy purely because it seems like the right thing to do. I'm running it on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I've created a Facebook page for it, which is wild.
Wow, yeah, that's a big step up in production value over last year. Remind me, last year I think you had something like 16 distilleries involved,
Um,
or
Last
by
year
involved I mean on the bracket.
on the bracket, I had initially 40 39 distilleries because there were 39 whiskey producing distilleries in Virginia at the time. And I think about 16 total really participated, shared posts, and you know, asked for votes. Um, and surprisingly, I believe that the final four were Virginia Distillery Company, Catoctin Creek, um, Falls Church Distillers, and Mount Vernon, the George Washington's Mount Vernon Distillery, which is, in case anybody is interested, an extremely cool look at the history of whiskey and distilling in the United States, in particular in Virginia. Um, and of course, the final 1v1 match to determine the champion was between Catoctin Creek and Falls Church Distillers, and Falls Church Distillers took it by a relatively narrow margin. Um,
And that I honestly think that was a surprising result, wasn't it?
oh yeah, I was really expecting for the really competitive distilleries to be Virginia Distillery Company, A. Smith Bowman, Catoctin Creek. I'm trying to think because I had a list of the ones that I suspected were going to be the top eight and then the top four. And I think the one that got knocked out the earliest that really surprised me was A. Smith Bowman was the first of the like seven or eight that I thought would go the distance to be knocked out in like the second round. Um, Virginia Distillery Company, of course, made it to the final four. KO Distilling got knocked out in the third round. Um, and it's just one of those
And was it
wild, like
five
you
rounds, six
never know.
rounds?
I think it was 6 rounds. I had to do some interesting playing with numbers because there were only 39, which is a weird number, or 38, uh, because one of them technically had not released a whiskey yet. Um, but they have since, and they are on the bracket for this year, bringing the total number of whiskey producing distilleries in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are included in the 2023 Virginia Whiskey Championship or Virginia Whiskey Tournament 44.
Nice. So, okay, remind me of the rules of how this tournament worked.
So basically, how it is, how I ran it last year was I ran polls on Twitter, and it was basically just popular vote, which of course does handicap some of the smaller guys who are producing really good stuff. But if you're building a community, if you're reaching out, if you're proactive, you can definitely win, like Falls Church Distillers definitely did. Um, But this year I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm running polls both on Twitter and on Facebook. I don't think I can run them on Instagram, unfortunately, but I can direct people to where they can vote. I'm reaching out to distilleries, getting them on board with competing. There is no entry fee or anything for them. They don't have to worry about any of that. It's literally just, get your fans to vote for you. Um, and I'm slowly working towards having a bottle from every Virginia distillery to hopefully when I announce the winners from each bracket. So the first week is going to start on the 1st of June, or no, the 4th of June because it's a Monday, and it will run from that Monday to that Friday. Um, it is going to be two batches, batch A and B. There are going to be four distilleries in each batch, and then the last week it's going to be two head-to-heads rather than just one for uh, for distillery bout. I could do it in one, but the way I built my bracket to make it symmetrical, I had to split it. Um, and I'm planning on figuring out a way to get a bottle from the winning distillery, from each bunch, so that I can, when I announce that they've won that vote, I can post a picture on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook of their bottle. I've already ordered the trophy, which is again a little Jefferson cup that says Virginia Whiskey Virginia Whiskey Champion 2023 on it. Um, and I'm really excited about this. I'm also really nervous. And I'm hoping that everything goes smoothly. And good luck to all of our competitors, knowingly and unknowingly.
Yeah, that's true, because not all of them are quite aware that this is happening, certainly last year.
No,
Um,
last year it was really funny. I got a direct message from someone after. I won't say who it was, because that would be sort of rude of me. I got a direct message on Twitter from one of the distilleries, or someone who works for them, that was basically along the lines of, "Hey, we didn't pay to like enter any whiskeys into this tournament. We don't really know what's going on. Um, uh, we didn't win clearly, but just wanted to know what was going on." And after I explained it to them, they were like, "Oh, well, shoot, we might have had a we might have been able to do a little bit better." But that's okay, because last year it was a spur of the moment thing that, like, I went, you know what, I'm going to run this tournament, and so I did with about 3 days notice.
yeah. I remember it sort of snuck up, and I was like, I wanted to vote in all of those brackets, but a lot of them were only open for 24 hours, which is another thing that made it sort of difficult. Uh,
Yes,
Even the people
but
voting didn't necessarily have time to realize it was happening and then cast a vote. Um,
right,
I think that's one of the reasons why your later brackets had so much attention, actually. I think you were in the hundreds, if I'm not mistaken,
yes, yeah,
of likes.
which really blew me away, and there was lots of uh, polite and not quite as polite banter between fans of various distilleries. Um, all of it ended up being relatively polite, well-meaning banter, but it was really fun, and I'm definitely going to be introducing myself to uh, distillers that I run into at the Virginia Spirits Expo on the 3rd, as being like, "Oh, by the way, I'm the guy running the Virginia Whiskey tournament."
Yeah, for sure, give them a heads up. So
Oh
not
yeah.
to not to cast aspersions on any particular brand, but a certain bird-themed website may not be the most stable platform to run your tournament on. Have you considered moving to Facebook or Instagram?
I'm running polls on Facebook alongside the ones on Twitter, and I'm going to try to do some YouTube stuff as well. Um,
Hmm.
I'm primarily going to be funneling my uh, funneling attention to Facebook and Twitter from Instagram, because I know that I can't run polls on Instagram.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't trust Twitter to remain a viable option forever, due to recent difficulties. Facebook is unnervingly stable, so hopefully, hopefully that works.
I wonder what
And
unnerving means with stability.
well, in this case, it's a sort of one of those weird, like, of all the social media platforms that I expected to just sort of like shoot itself in the foot and crumble, I wasn't expecting Twitter. I was kind of expecting Facebook to do that, because I don't know if you remember, but in like 2019, 2020, they had that huge issue with misinformation and disinformation and
True.
content moderation that sort of resulted in like wild changes to how they moderated groups, and
Yeah. And
and then
as far as I know, mostly to a relative degree of success.
yeah, which is what
Kind of
sort of
surprising.
blows me away.
Because
Yeah,
every other platform that's tried to do such a thing is pretty much blown up.
yeah. Although I will say that Facebook still um serves me up marketplace ads for things that are definitely illegal. And I'm not talking like, oh, this dude is selling something that's illegal. I'm talking about like paid for promoted ads for things like uh uh I don't know if I want to talk about
Nah, it's fine. I think we've all seen the kind of thing you're talking about, and we can just move on
yeah,
from that.
yeah. Oh, and
Not to mention the
things that
illegal
go
sale
bang.
of whiskey. Now let's talk about that for a
Oh yeah.
second.
Oh
Facebook
yeah.
Facebook is lousy with illegal sale of whiskey. And anyone who's on Facebook looking to buy or sell whiskey, if you don't
Oh.
know, and you should know, what you're doing is illegal and it also harms the industry.
Hmm.
Stop it.
Also,
End soapbox.
you are incredibly likely to be scammed.
That, and also increasingly likely to get caught by the Fed.
Oh yeah. A group that I had been a member of that I left. Um, I went through a period because I was mostly active on Facebook where I was joining whiskey groups, going, this place is full of people who are flippers and taters. I'm out. One of the groups that I did an in and out of got busted by the ATF. A bunch of their members, their moderator, apparently got arrested. I mean, relatively local group. Um, and the Facebook shut down their group, and via ABC police and ATF people went and talked to moderators and people that they could confirm had crossed state lines to sell allocated whiskey.
Oh boy.
Um, so
Yeah.
just a
By the
heads
way,
up,
we
they
haven't
will
plugged
find
the
you.
Whiskey Lodge aside from our logo and the
Oh,
title of the podcast. But
oh yeah,
on the Whiskey Lodge, this is the reason why we have a zero tolerance policy for the sale
yes,
of alcohol. Now, most people on Discord are pretty well-meaning and are there to socialize, not to sell things. As
right.
a matter of fact, our rule against selling need not be said because it is against Discord terms of service and illegal in the United States. But it is rule number 10, which is the last of our rules, because it's kind of a last but not least thing. If you're going to see things on the rules list, you might read 1, 2, 3, and 10. And it's nice to be able to hit the question mark ban rule 10, right? Like you
Yeah,
violated you're trying to sell whiskey here, and we will burn every message that you've sent to the server because we cannot risk the integrity of our
yes.
server because some idiot showed up trying to do something illegal.
Oh, there was somebody who their first message they dropped in, "Yo, I'm so and so. I just really got into whiskey. I've got lots of Blantons if anybody wants any." Nope,
Yeah,
nope.
I don't know if it was Blanton. There was one recently that we had where it was like, "Hey, dude, you didn't quite say I'm selling whiskey, but you have it was like he had a stack of EHTs, I think.
Oh, that's what it was. A stack of
Um,
EHTs.
so he's like, he's like, look at all this EHT that I have, and he didn't say anything else. And I'm like, dude, nobody cares. And then later
Oh,
on, he's like, hey, message me
I think it was.
maybe. And I'm like, no, we're not like this is obviously that you're trying to sell this stuff because who posts a pile of EHT anywhere without trying to sell it?
So so the first one was, um, look what I've got in stock, and I went in stock.
Yeah, in stock. Come on, dude.
Yeah. Also, anytime somebody comes in like bragging about huge amounts of whiskeys, I reverse image search, and 9 times out of 10, this stack of like, ooh, every Blanton's for the last 5 years or whatever, it's like posted from like the Buffalo Trace Twitter account or something. Like, come on, guys. You're
Honestly, I that you've done a lot more homework on deciding whether to ban someone than I guess I see the appeal. I am much quicker to just ban the person and delete all the
oh yeah,
pictures because I don't want there to be any idea from any of our members that this is okay in
yes.
any way, let alone leaving behind the suggestion that it has ever been allowed. because it is not.
Yes. And that's one of those interesting things is every once in a while, somebody will make sort of a sideways, sort of approaching it from another angle, sort of comment about, I'm sure we can work something out to get you a. Nope. There
Yeah,
was at one point, there may still be an
there is, of
actual
course.
human member of the Discord staff, like actual company employee
Yes,
in our
yes,
server.
an actual Discord employee was a member of our server because he likes whiskey, right? Like not because he was
Yeah,
trying to
no,
please us, probably.
no. He was actually really cool. He had some really interesting, like sort of off the wall whiskeys that I had never heard of that were really interesting sounding. I kind of miss talking to him because he had some really interesting insights into, what made whiskey interesting to him.
By the way, I don't
Um,
think he left. I think he just became inactive on the
yeah, I
server.
think so.
Um,
Um, but it's one of those like, hey, uh, you may think that you're avoiding bots, but bots aren't what you need to avoid. Also,
right.
uh, the obvious bait um, Discord bios, we see those.
That's right.
We
Yeah,
know.
I plug my socials in my Discord bio, but the fact is,
Yeah.
there's no reason to illegally acquire whiskey.
No.
Um, you know, we've said a couple of times on this podcast already that we'll find a way to get samples into each other's hands, right? We don't live
Yeah.
all in the same place, but you know, there are in fact legal ways to give whiskey to your friends.
Yes.
Sale is strictly prohibited. Meeting up in
Yep.
person, putting whiskey into your checked luggage is perfectly legal in as long as the whiskey is below
Yep.
70% alcohol and as long as it's
And
not gonna blow
properly
up.
sealed.
Yeah, and properly sealed, as long as it's not in your carry-on bags. You can, if I happen to be visiting Virginia or Kentucky,
Yeah.
and I know that there's somebody there who's a friend of mine from the Whiskey Lodge who I would like to have some samples of my stuff. I am giving it to them for free. I've got more whiskey in my possession than I could drink in my life responsibly. Um,
Probably the same.
and in fact, I probably will have an ever increasing quantity because I buy things faster than I can
Yeah.
consume them, and that's an unfortunate reality. I'm literally trying to give away my stuff. There's no reason at all for me to be selling my whiskey, right?
Yeah.
I
I
give,
mean,
I
well,
give, and I receive because, and this is the gray area, right? There is absolutely
yeah.
no transaction happening here. This is
Yeah.
friends letting each other. This is the same thing as inviting a friend over to your house and sharing a bottle.
Exactly.
That is the way to
Exactly.
acquire and try whiskey that you don't own.
And
And I think there's plenty of opportunities for that among people who live close together, especially, and even
yes.
the rare opportunity to meet up with somebody across the country and do the same.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing that is a very unfortunate thing that people do, which is one of those you've got to know better, is the whole selling empties thing. Because, like, and that's something that we've had to talk about at least once in the lodge, was we don't no selling of empties because yeah, we all know each other, we're all friends, whatever. I don't know you particularly well. If I give you an empty uh Van Winkle rye bottle because you want to use it as a prop in a movie, first of all, I'm not going to do that because that would be like I'm not giving this to you.
It's counterfeit fodder is the problem, right?
Yeah,
There is a
yeah,
counterfeiting
yeah,
problem in this industry,
yes,
and if you give somebody an empty of an allocated bottle or a hard to find or a valuable bottle, they will fill it with
yes.
brown liquid of any description and
Mm-hmm.
reseal it in sometimes very convincing ways and
Oh
sell
yeah,
it for illegally sell it for $2,000, $3,000, and the person who buys it may never know because they've never tasted the real thing or they may never open it.
yes.
Um,
That's
it's just a
so.
huge problem.
Oh yeah,
Everybody's enjoyment of this entire hobby gets worse because of people selling things.
and And if you think, oh, well, I'm sure you can tell. Acker Wines in New York, someone who's been in business for over 100 years in New York, got caught with multiple counterfeit bottles. I am unconvinced that it wasn't more to it than they claim, but I cannot legally say that their story is BS. But their story was that they have limited purview to acquire bottles from private collections, and employees were getting duped by fakes. Um, and it became enough of a problem from that store in particular that a reporter went and bought a bottle of E.H. Taylor. I think that they went and bought the Hurricane Survivor bottle. Um, from E.H. Taylor or Tornado Survivor or something.
That's an interesting
And
story,
then
but not for today.
yeah,
Look it up
and
though,
sent it.
if you're watching and you're curious what that's about.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool thing, but also it's Buffalo Trace. So it was wildly upmarked and so on and so forth. Um, but they sent it to Buffalo Trace in Kentucky, and Buffalo Trace went, "Yep, this isn't ours. This is a counterfeit." Which prompted a investigation of Acker wines, and there were multiple counterfeits found. And then there was Justin's, which was an actual respected Kentucky, um, uh, I think it was
Auction
Justin's House of
house?
Bourbon.
Was it an auction house? I remember this story.
They weren't an auction house. They were a liquor store, museum, and bourbon experience.
Oh, it's
Uh,
the museum and experience part that got me, right? It's not just a
yeah.
store. But yeah, I remember the whole Justin's thing. That was pretty lots of people got arrested.
Oh yeah, and millions of dollars worth of inventory in terms of if it was actually really what it was supposed to be got seized and destroyed because they were selling more Blantons a year than Buffalo Trace was producing. Which how? First of all, second of all, there's no way that somebody didn't crunch numbers and go, "Oh, that's not right." Like, and the Blanton's one is just the one that people use as a reference. They sold more Blantons in a year than Buffalo Trace produced, which
That's a good way to get caught. Check your
yeah,
numbers.
yeah,
It turns out that money launderers are often greedy, and that's how they get caught, tax evaders.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and no amount of, well, obviously, don't be greedy, right? If you're going to commit a
yeah,
crime, don't be greedy. If you're going to commit a crime, don't commit two crimes at once. But the fact is, criminals are greedy and stupid,
oh yeah,
oftentimes.
and they'll always do well, it's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more effort.
No
Look
one
at
will
that
ever know.
payout. Yeah, how would they know? No, they'll know. They will always know.
Yeah.
The
Everyone in the
ATF
industry
does
is
not.
interested in protecting their brands, and the government is
Oh yeah,
interested in protecting their tax revenue. And whiskey is a lot of tax revenue for the government.
oh yeah, and the ATF doesn't fuck around. Like you wanna know something kind of scary? You know who's got the highest conviction rates?
The
I mean,
ATF.
first of all, the U.S. Postal Service has like a 98% conviction rate when they go to court, which is wild. Don't
For
mess with
mail
the
fraud.
mail. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Um, VA ABC Police have an entire wing that is dedicated to busting counterfeiters and people who buy, sell, and trade illegally. And trade in this case means like selling large quantities. Trade as in the practice of, and not like
Yeah.
giving your friend a sample.
Right. Yeah. So
Um,
if you invite a friend over, and I have a friend who had a bottle he didn't like, and he was just like, you like Balcones. For me, it's like it's too hot. It kind of feels like gasoline, whatever. Right. I understand. Especially if you're not used to high proof spirits and everything
mhm.
Balcones, like the standard single malt from Balcones, if I'm not mistaken, is 53% alcohol. That's a very high base bottling.
Oh
So
yeah.
he didn't like the Balcones. He was like, "Here, you like. I know you like Balcones and you like American single malt. You should just have this." And then, like a little while later, I essentially I gave it back to him by buying him a gift um, sometime later
Yeah.
of a bottle that he expressed to me at some other time that he did like. Right? That's
Yeah.
in a sense that's trade, but really that's just friends regularly giving each other gifts.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge
But
difference between that
It's
and
not trade in the sense of the economy, right?
yeah.
It's not trade in the sense of I've got a business moving large volumes of stuff.
Yes. And that
Trading
is
between friends is something that honestly, like the government, it's not worth the government's time to go after that kind of
no.
thing, small scale. Um,
And VA ABC police have a reputation, and for a damn good reason. You don't mess with VA ABC police. They are brutal, they are unkind, they will find you and they will get you.
is that a particular reputation of the Virginia ABC, or are the other ABCs
Particular
similarly?
reputation of the Virginia ABC. One of the most effective VA ABC, or one of the most effective alcohol policing law enforcement branches in the U.S. Um, one of the things that they put out every year is that they bust more moonshiners than anyone else in the U.S. And part of that is that moonshining is a way of life in Virginia. It's part of our history. It's a part of our culture. I don't moonshine. I don't think I know anybody who moonshines, but it is a big deal out in Appalachia.
So is that
Um,
strictly just producing for personal use, or does some sale need to occur for it to be illegal?
um, you have to have a license to produce. If you do not have a license to produce, VAABC will shut you down, and they won't do it nicely. Um,
There you go,
and
folks. Don't mess with the government when it comes to alcohol.
yeah, uh, and like VAABC police are not a branch of the government that you want to mess with to begin with. They have a tendency to be heavy-handed and cruel, and some of that is absolutely for effect. They're not the only ones who operate in that manner. You do not want to mess with the ATF. If you are doing something illegal in regards to spirits and the ATF catches wind, they will make it worth their time because that's what they do. Don't sell spirits. Don't drop into Discord servers, Facebook groups, DM people on Twitter. Oh hey, I got plenty of this Blanton's. I got plenty of this EH Taylor. Huh? 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 No,
Yeah, yeah.
don't.
Hey, buddy, want to buy a watch?
I've
Yeah.
got a bridge for sale.
So we've been harping on this for a bit now. I think
Oh
we've
yeah,
said
sorry.
way more than needs to be said, but if it's not clear, we have a very negative attitude towards people doing anything illegal here. It really
Yes.
truly does hurt everyone. It hurts
Oh
the
yeah.
buyer, it hurts the seller if you get, especially if you get caught, it's gonna cost you. Um, it hurts the
And
industry,
the
right?
yeah,
Everything in the industry, yeah,
the people who make it are competing against counterfeiters to an
that's right.
extent.
That's right. And
And
their relatively reasonable prices are competing against secondary market price, which you would think would be
yeah,
like an easy problem to solve, right? The lower priced thing obviously is going to be the thing that people buy. The problem is when the street value of something has been artificially inflated by the illegal trade. And it really like
yes.
if there was any sanity in the world of whiskey, the price of something would be worth one of what did it cost to produce and how does it taste?
Yes.
Those two factors are the things that should affect the value, the price of a bottle, not the stonks angle.
Yeah.
Not somebody decided to say this thing is great, and told all their friends and said we should buy up every bottle of Blanton's in the state of Virginia, right? But that's
And
what's happened, and now it's allocated. And Virginia actually has a system for lottery
oh yeah.
sale of these things so that normal consumers can actually buy them for the correct price. Some states don't. A lot of
hmm
states don't. And so if
And
you decided you wanted to corner the market on Blanton's, well, you can, and people have. and then the only way you can buy it is to pay 4 times as much illegally.
So one of my favorite fun facts is right after I bought this, which I got through the VA ABC lottery for I think about $128, which is MSRP plus tax. Somebody sent me a picture of a liquor store somewhere in, I want to say, the Midwest, or maybe somewhere in the Northeast. I don't remember exactly where, of a liquor store that had the Van Winkle Family Reserve Rye 13 years old, marked at $2,000.
This was just somebody in the whiskey lodge, right? Being like, "Hey, I saw that, and it cost," right?
It was somebody in the Whiskey Lodge who DM'd me the picture. It's like, you didn't pay this much, did you? It's like, nope, nope.
You know, the lovely state. More states should have a lottery, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
Partly because, so like here in Washington, the closest thing you're going to get to a lottery is Total Wine is a huge liquor store, Total Wine and More.
yeah,
Um, and they do a lottery, but in order to participate in the lottery, you basically are incentivized to buy a lot of their house brand spirits to get points to get yourself into the
yes,
premium membership, premium customer, whatever. And there's a whole lot of, so this is a bad system. There's a whole lot of people, in my opinion, who are either being encouraged to drink an unhealthy amount or who are being encouraged to buy things they don't want or need and won't consume just so that they have a chance to get access to the stuff
yes.
that they really want and overpay for it anyway. I have a hard time
Like
supporting that.
I've seen an amazing picture that was posted in a Facebook group from somebody who lived in an area where Total Wine sold spirits, which is not in Virginia, of someone who filled warehouse shelves in their basement with the Spirits Direct brands, like the stuff that Total Wine wants you to buy to earn points to. They filled like the 3 foot deep, 8 foot long shelves, like 2 or 3 deep,
Like the
with
IKEA shelves that I have in my garage.
yeah, filled
Yeah, just
with
completely filled.
Spirits Direct brand stuff because they wanted to be able to buy the allocated stuff, and they weren't drinking that stuff. I mean, they had some opened because they were drinking it, but also there's no way they were going to get through all that.
Yeah, you just
There's
can't.
no way they were enjoying it as much as they were purchasing it for.
Yeah.
And that's like the every once in a while you see pictures of, oh hey, is this a good deal? Of one of those, oh, in order to get this bottle of Blanton's, you have to or you have to buy a bottle of regular Buffalo Trace and 3 bottles of Wheatley,
Yeah,
which I'm sure Wheatley is fine,
when
but
I was real early on in buying things and I wanted to try things like the more famous weeded bourbons, I would
yes,
say fell for a scheme like that, right? I was genuinely interested in trying the Buffalo Trace vodka, like the Wheatley vodka. Like, yeah,
yeah,
why not?
yeah.
Right? Interested in trying is not the same thing as buying a whole 750 milliliter bottle to sit on my shelf.
This is a lot of vodka. Like,
Is that deep Eddy?
okay,
No, deep run. Okay.
deep run. So this is actually very good stuff. This is my home bar vodka. It is produced by A. Smith Bowman. It's
Yeah.
actually really good stuff.
I
I
didn't
did
know they
not
had
buy
such a
this.
product, but I recognized the
Yeah.
bottle.
I did not have to buy this to get anything else. I bought it because I was in the process of, every product on my show that I was running at the time. I wanted to be a Virginia product because that's how into craft spirits I was and still am. Um, but like a 750 milliliter bottle, this bottle has lasted me for 3 or 4 years. If you're not a vodka drinker, a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka will last you for a
Yeah.
while. And if you have to buy multiple
Uh,
in order to buy that bottle of Blanton's,
yeah. And vodka's dirt cheap to produce.
oh yeah,
Especially the stuff that you're there are premium vodkas that are made expensively. Whether that matters or not is a discussion for another day. Um,
mhm,
I would say there's the school that says vodka is not allowed to have a flavor, therefore there cannot be a difference between vodkas. And the fact is that the TTB will let you get away with a lot,
Oh yeah.
and generally flavorless is not the same thing as truly flavorless. And if you produce a vodka by running it through a pot still 4 times, it's gonna retain maybe a little bit of flavor from the grain,
Yeah.
like and like enough that if you were putting two vodkas next to each other that you could tell there's a difference even if you can't identify which is which.
Yes.
Um,
And
but yeah,
like for
that's kind of a
example,
conversation for another day. I last week
yeah.
ran out of vodka because we were using it. We bought some fresh shrimp, sashimi quality shrimp,
Ooh,
spotted shrimp.
I can't eat that.
Fair enough. Uh, we occasionally there's a fish wholesaler that's
Yeah.
15-minute drive away from us in the
I didn't
where
mean to derail. Sorry.
oh no, that's fine. So I don't use my vodka for anything. Pretty much for vodka for me is pretty much I'm gonna make a black Russian or a white Russian, right? And it's just
Hmm.
kind of it's part of the spec, and the purpose of it is more to cut the sweetness of the Kahlua than it is to add anything other than alcohol to the drink. You could
Right.
just as easily at this point, I say, I haven't bought a bottle of Mr. Black personally, but like a less sweet coffee liqueur and
Yeah.
cream is probably going to make just as good of a White Russian.
Let me just put it out there. I know for a fact that using a white rum makes it a different drink altogether, but very good,
Yeah, I would
depending
try
on the
that for
rum.
sure. Yeah. I'm always open to different cocktail specs and like alternate twists on things.
Oh
So
yeah.
anyway, I had this vodka since before the pandemic. Bought it in probably 2018. I don't use vodka pretty much at all. Started buying whiskey, drinking whiskey all the
Yeah.
time. So vodka was like pretty much only for that one cocktail, and for preserving things. So what we did, we bought these sashimi quality shrimp, and there was like too much for us to eat in one night, and we're like, well, we don't really want to cook them all, and they won't be as good if we let them die in the fridge and then we eat them tomorrow for lunch.
Right.
So what do we
Right.
do? Okay, let's just like throw some alcohol in there to preserve them, basically, right? Kill them,
Yeah.
but don't let them rot at all, or sort of anything
Yes.
like that. And so they were effectively as good sashimi the next day, just boozier.
Yeah.
And that's how we used up the vodka. And I haven't bought a new vodka since. And I think it was actually 2 weeks ago. I'm barely even thinking about it.
So I will say, apparently there are these people in Oregon who make pretty good vodka. I can't think of their name. Yeah, they primarily make like brandy, but apparently they make a pretty good vodka.
Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Timberline vodka, yeah?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So we like to shill for Hood River Distillers and Clear Creek Distillery because we absolutely
yes.
love their products. And we will have some of their
Oh yeah,
distillers on this podcast eventually. There's a loose commitment. Um,
yeah,
we're good friends with at least a few of them. Uh,
yeah. I
and
mean, Joe and Caitlin definitely.
Yeah, and Alex at Big Gin, who also works for Hood River Distillers. Um,
Yes.
so I before I went to the Seattle Cocktail Week showcase, whatever it was,
Hmm.
last year, and ran into Joe at the booth, and he was like, "You got to try Timberline vodka. Like you've never had this before. I know you don't drink much vodka, but you got to try this. So they make it from apples, and they have this whole thing where
Yeah.
they really care about the fermentation and the yeast, and like there's a lot of variables that like any sort of distilled product has a lot of variables that develop
Oh yeah.
flavor. We talked about it last week. Whatever flavor happens to survive distillation and passes the whatever threshold for flavorless among the general consumer who is
Hmm.
deciding whether something is vodka or not. Um, they essentially produced, I guess the nice way to summarize it would be that they produced an unaged apple brandy. And it's also, they've got barley in there too, so it's not actually an apple brandy, but like
Yeah.
they produced a mix of unaged whiskey and unaged apple brandy is one way of putting it. And then they distilled it in such a way on a pot still to make it vodka, right? Essentially
Hmm.
flavorless, and yet it has the texture of apples.
Ooh.
Like this sort of, it has like this sort of crispness that you would associate with, the fruit apples, without so much the flavor. Like there's
Yeah.
things that your palate can sense about something that
Yeah.
gives it a different quality that's not so much a flavor. And it's really hard to explain. I think that if you pass this by the general consumer, certainly as soon as anything touches it, water, a mixer, whatever, it's essentially indistinguishable from another vodka.
Right.
But neat by itself, there's a difference in like the level of acetone and the level of like other
Mhm.
fusel alcohols and potentially some usually unpleasant flavors, right? Like you might say the ideal
Yeah.
vodka is strictly ethanol and water, but that is so hard to achieve. It's essentially
Right.
impossible.
And it's so easy to accidentally get something that will be just a negative little flavor that, again, mix it in a cocktail, you won't notice. But, like, for example, I've had vodka in mixed drinks that with the wrong mixer, just this, like, sharp, bitter, like, chemical taste cuts through.
Yeah. I have heard from bartenders who would know way better than me that uh, the wrong vodka in a vodka cocktail can ruin the drink. And I know that there are certain people, a former roommate of mine, for example, who was like, well, the law says it has to be flavorless, therefore there can't be a difference, right? In this whole, and NPR
Mhm.
did a whole thing where they, maybe not a perfect experiment, where they took essentially, it sounded like lay people and
Mhm.
tried to blind them on a bunch of different, like people who don't have a trained palate for tasting spirits and
Oh, yeah.
saying, can you tell me which one is the more expensive one? And like there was essentially no correlation between the average rating people gave and the price.
Yeah.
And like that makes sense
Yeah.
because really like they are detecting what they think is a difference and they can't
Right.
tell which is better or not because especially in vodka, whether it was more expensive to produce does not actually affect quality in a linear way. You really just need to find a vodka that works for you and go with it.
So, is this the experiment where the people conducting it bought a bunch of vodka concentrate, which, by the way, is a thing that you can buy, by the way. It's not vodka concentrate, but that's what I like to call it because that's hilarious sounding.
You're talking about neutral grain spirits, Everclear, right?
I mean, well, yeah.
Everclear and
Except,
associated brands.
except they didn't use Everclear because Everclear famously is just awful. It's
Yeah.
really sharp, spiky. That what 5% impurity is just something that will like kick you in the back of the head. Um, but they got some stuff that was basically what other brands use to create their vodka, and they went through the process of proofing it over the course of like an afternoon or something down to like 40% ish. I think their math was slightly off, but anyway,
Yeah, there's the whole
and
alcohol by volume versus alcohol by mass,
yes.
which it turns out a mixture of alcohol and water changes density in a nonlinear way. And that's a whole thing that you can look up. There's a table for it they call alcoholometric tables if you're interested in figuring out how this works. This is one of the reasons why
It's
if
wild.
you've got a proof, like they've got like these, they look like pool floaty for thermometers.
Hmm.
They've got a weight in the bottom and they're balanced so that when you stick this in a quantity of alcohol, it'll tell you what its proof is. That's one of the easiest ways to tell the proof. It's not super accurate, but it's close enough. It's one of the easiest ways to tell what the proof of a liquid is. And the scale on that is not linear because, for
Hmm.
one thing, the more of the weight of that bobber is out of the water, the more it weighs down on itself, but also because the density of the mixture does not change linearly.
Yes. Um, but amongst other things, one of the things that I found the funniest about that was there was somebody who was insistent that their house brand that they created in an afternoon had to be the Grey Goose. That's got to be the really expensive good stuff. That's got to be it.
Interesting. Yeah,
Which I found hilarious.
now that you've described that, I wonder if they did, because I think that would be the idea is like if you just have something that is as close as possible to pure ethanol and then add water to it and say, okay, now we have
Yeah.
vodka, which is like, okay, kind of technically true.
Yeah.
I don't think TTP would have a problem with that production process. It's not how all vodka is
No.
produced, but that's one way to do it.
No.
Um, yeah,
And
I
then
mean,
there's
that's a
also
logical thing to add to a lineup of vodka, right? Take all of your vodkas and
yeah.
water them down to the same 40% approximately, test them all against each other. I'll confess, I didn't read this article or listen to this podcast, whatever it was, so I don't know the details. But from talking to vodka producers, the answer is what legally qualifies as vodka is different from what the letter of the law would imply. And that is
Yes.
kind of true across most spirits. Aside from
Yeah.
there is a hard line on what your ingredients are and certain elements of the process and like your
Yes.
barrels and so on. But there are other aspects of like flavor and so on that are there's a little wiggle room with certain things. And part of it is just like, did you produce something that is in spirit, the spirit that you intended to produce?
Yes.
Why do we need to police beyond that? It's not worth
Yeah.
anybody's time if everybody's happy with the product and it's not outright misleading.
I will say there are a few things that I have encountered that I think are labeled misleadingly, but that's maybe something for another day. Um, Specifically in terms of, what can go into a whiskey, and how you label a whiskey that is a little suspect.
It has to
Um,
do in some cases with what the government protects as terms and descriptions on the label and what they don't.
right.
And in certain cases, what they don't protect can be misleading. We talked about the big number on rums,
Oh yeah.
for
Oh
example.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
so like, yeah, it's not like they said anything that was untrue according to the regulations. It's just that you
no.
were led to believe there was an
Right.
implication. Yeah.
Um, One good one is there is a Virginian product that says rye in great big letters. It notably does not say rye whiskey,
Hmm.
but it is a whiskey, and it does say rye in big letters.
Interesting.
And it has flavors added to it
I see.
that it is not upfront about. And that is one that I find to be an interesting edge case on at what point does it stop being whiskey if you're adding things? And at what point do you have to specify what you are adding slash flavoring it?
Yeah. Turns out the
Because,
regulations are actually pretty clear about this, but the consumer may in some cases be surprised by what is allowed.
yes. And I am frequently surprised by what is allowed because I'll look at something and go, how did you. The TTB approved that? And that's another thing, by the way. The TTB on label approval will frequently approve a label with notes that are supposed to result in a change to the label that never happens. And I've
Hmm.
seen that, and it's an interesting thing, because the TTB just doesn't have the funding or personnel to go through and fix those. But I have also seen the TTB reject a label, um, and demand a change in order to accept it. It just it's a consistency thing. And then you've got stuff like there's a distillery in Vermont that is famous for sourcing Canadian rye whiskey, who had a label that contained the word bonded that was not a whiskey bottled in bond. And TTB approved it, uh, with the note that it should not say bonded. And
And
somebody
that
pointed
feels
it
like
out.
something that might be maybe you just reject that one.
Yeah. Somebody pointed it out to this distillery and the TTB, and the TTB was talking about revoking the approval, and they surrendered the label, and then
Okay.
made a big deal about how the TTB was keeping them down and crushing the spirit of small business, et cetera, and so forth. And it's one of those like that's a brand that I will never buy from again. Not because they're like standing up to the TTB, but because they tried to pull a fast one. They tried to break literally the first Consumer Protection Act ever passed in the US and would have gotten away with it and could have bowed out and said, "Oh, we will fix this," and instead started to raise a stink. And that's not cool.
Yeah. The you can understand a gut reaction, like an immediate reaction
Hmm.
to being told, "Hey, you're doing the wrong thing." Uh, oh wow, I really didn't intend to. Let me make some adjustment and fix that.
Hmm.
Um, being like that's the considered media response, right? Like you've
Hmm.
got plenty of time to be chastised and then figure out what you're going to do about it without making a stink. So the considered response would be like, oh, you know, there's really no other way to interpret that now that we like, even if you didn't know the
Yeah.
law, if you had done it by accident, oh, we didn't realize that we couldn't do that. We made a mistake. We're going to fix it and just have it all be quiet, surrender the label, make a new one,
Yeah.
and then that would be fine, right? But you could imagine like if you were on a phone call with somebody and they said, "Hey, you broke the law by putting this label, but by putting this word on your label," and be like, "Man, I didn't break the law. I didn't know." Like you're,
Yeah.
and then like
Yeah.
doubling down on that whole perspective and being like, "Man, the man's trying to keep us down," and like you could imagine that like if somebody was really riled up, they could
Yeah.
mistakenly uh double down in poor taste.
Yeah. But that's a heat of the moment thing.
Yeah, but in a
And given that
controlled
this
media
brand is
response,
90% PR.
right? Yeah, and there are brands like that, and you can see right through brands like that, especially once they start piping up, right? It's one thing to put your bottle on the
Yeah.
shelf. It's another to say we care so much about our PR nonsense that we're willing to go to court over it, and maybe we don't have the liquid to back it up.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Now,
and
I don't know
I
who this
don't
brand
think
is, and in general, let's not name them because I don't want
no.
to I don't want to name bad
No, I will
names.
not name this brand. There are a lot of brands that I will bring up and refuse to name. People who can read between the
Yeah,
lines can guess what they are. Keep that out of our comments, please.
yeah,
It is to illustrate an example
yeah.
using a real world. This is a thing that happened.
I will
Um,
say, and I won't name a distillery, but I will say there's a distillery. You probably know who I'm talking about. I won't get into too many details because I think it'll be obvious. But
yeah.
there's a particular label or series of labels from this particular distillery that are somewhat controversial because of the implication they make. And it actually is perfectly fine with TTB, may not be fine in the rest of the world. Um, and I haven't had that whiskey, so I cannot judge the whiskey on its own merits. I have seen the labels and I agree, I think this is potentially misleading. Having spoken to the individuals who had something to do with that, uh, I will say it seems to me like they think that what they're doing is an homage to something. Um,
Oh, yes.
and that I think is a perfectly acceptable stance to take. I'm not going to criticize that stance. I will just say I understand why some people have an issue with those
Yes.
labels. And all of that said, I think they've handled it very well from a PR perspective, and I have no problem with the brand.
Yeah. I mean, and like when someone does something good, someone may call this a double standard. When someone does something good, I will call them out for doing something good. I'll be like, "Hey, this is great. Go support this distillery." I talked at length about how much I love Catoctin Creek. KO Distilling does cool stuff. Cashel makes great peated single malt. But and this is something that I wrestled with on my channel about bad reviews of things, and it's a different animal because with a review of a spirit, I'm reviewing it on its merits, and I can say I did not enjoy this. But when it comes to like this company completely fabricated this story. This company took a product that was readily available already from a industrial supplier. They put their label on it. They didn't even do any additional aging or finishing and sold the world a story about a relative and a secret recipe in Al Capone. You know, that gets into the territory of, and by the way, there are multiple brands who have done that, like all the way down to, ooh, Al Capone and the Chicago mob. I mean, unless you've got hard evidence to back it up, just don't. You know, it just don't. I, especially if you're taking something that's an off the shelf or off the rack um, spirit from
Yep.
a massive producer that
Yep.
supplies a lot of other brands. You
Yep.
know,
and saying that this is an ancient, this is a hundreds of years, ancient is going too far. Saying this recipe has been
Yeah.
in the family for hundreds of years, when in fact it is more or less publicly known that you're buying it from someone that doesn't need, that's from a producer that's not even in your state,
Yes.
that sells the same
Um.
whiskey to everybody else that wants it.
Oh yeah. Another good one is the we carefully select our barrels aged at the top of our rick house in our extremely arid climate, and
Climate
then
controlled.
well, oh no,
Well,
it's even
no. Oh,
dumber.
okay,
Oh,
okay,
it's even dumber.
okay. Give it to me.
If you do a little bit of digging and look at some like actual fine text on their website, uh,
They
it's
disclaim
being
responsibility for them actually being from the top or something to that
nope,
effect. Okay, it's
nope.
even
It
better.
is it is sourced.
Oh no.
It is transported to them and then bottled.
Nice.
And it's somebody who I believe is also producing their high end line, but their more approachable, affordable stuff is sourced from MGP, aged in Indiana, transported to where they bottle it, and bottled. And on the one hand, I admire the hustle. On the other hand, your marketing material is just outright lies, like
Yeah,
potentially get you in trouble lies. Um,
potentially.
and and that's
But
really
not
unfortunate.
necessarily, and that's kind of where it gets
No,
interesting, where there's a
because
lot you can
like
get
that
away
gray
with
area.
if the court of public opinion is not something you care about, and
Yeah.
the government is all that you care about. There's a lot you can get away with, and that's kind of unfortunate. I wanna add a couple of notes. First of all, I mentioned climate controlled as a foil to it
Yes.
was aged in the top of the warehouse. There's nothing wrong with climate controlled whiskey aging. There are a lot
You
of
can do
things you
some
can
really cool
do.
stuff.
Yeah, so like you could intentionally fluctuate the temperature to maybe, so in theory, accelerate the wood influence on your whiskey. You can't cheat time. Esterification takes time. For example, Copperworks that I just spoke to, their barrel warehouses are climate controlled at 70 degrees year round, give or take. And that is a choice that they've made, and they find that they get good whiskey by doing it. And they've tried the experiments of doing it longer, shorter, different temperatures, as I understand. Definitely the longer and shorter. Different types of barrels, maybe different
Mhm.
temperatures, I'm not sure. Um, climate controlled is a choice. Sometimes in the environment you're in, it's just infeasible to not have climate controlled.
Right.
Like imagine if your barrels were in a warehouse in the desert with lots of airflow, you would lose all of your whiskey before it was ready to drink. So maybe some workarounds are necessary.
So
Um,
going back to like pre-prohibition, there were steam heated warehouses in Pennsylvania for rye whiskey because it got so cold for so much of the year because this is back in the 1910s 1920s in Pennsylvania, which used to get really cold. Um still gets really cold. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but gets extremely cold in the winter, and they were discovering that it would get below a certain temperature and the rickhouse would stay that temperature for well into the spring because all of that mass takes a while to heat up. So I don't remember who it was, but somebody had a steam heated warehouse so that they were getting a little bit more temperature fluctuation and better whiskey barrel interaction because it was just so cold for a good chunk of the year that they weren't able to get good barrel extraction.
right. And cold, of course, shuts down a lot of those chemical reactions you want to happen in the
Yes.
barrels. Below a certain temperature, they're basically just not aging, right? It's too cold for the chemical reactions to take place.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that note, right? Climate controlled is one of these levers you can pull with
Hmm.
your aging, right? You can choose to go all natural, you can choose to go climate controlled, you can choose to simulate changes in seasons from a certain environment that is not necessarily yours. Not the only way to have regional variation is your climate in aging. You can choose to embrace that or not. And the other note I was going to make is there's nothing wrong with sourcing whiskey. Lots of people
No.
lots of people like us who go on the internet to talk about whiskey will make this point. There's nothing wrong with sourcing whiskey. It is, in fact, a necessary part of the industry. If you are a brand new whiskey company, you are by definition not going to have something that you can call, uh, say, a straight whiskey. It has to be at least 2 years old
Hmm.
until you've been aging your first liquid for 2 years. And even then, it may not be a good product yet. You may need more age on it for it to be
Hmm.
good. The way to solve this problem, there's a couple of ways to solve this problem. One is you produce vodka and gin, which doesn't need aging, and you sell that in your tasting room to make money until you have a whiskey product. The other is to start building your whiskey brand by developing the logos and the label wording and so on, and you're almost all prepared to be there, but you have to disclose the state of distillation on your label is, I believe, a legal requirement. Although a
Yes,
lot of people skirt this
have
requirement.
gotten around it.
Yeah, probably mostly because nobody noticed, or it's hard for somebody reviewing the label to know for sure. There's got to be disclosures and stuff,
Right.
but TTB's trying their best, and they have a lot of labels that come in, right? Thousands a year.
To for to give you a good idea of that sort of volume, in the week between our first and second episode, uh, narrowing my search of their label approvals and applications just to approved, rejected, and surrendered. So not pending, just approved, rejected, surrendered. Over 1,000
In a week.
in a week.
Yeah.
So,
I was thinking thousands just in American single malt because there's
oh yeah.
200 plus producers of American single malt, and they're going to be releasing a few different expressions a year.
So this is a really good, interesting sourced whiskey. This is a blend of two MGP rye whiskeys finished in Gary Oak, which is kind of cool. It does, interestingly say, produced and bottled by East Side Distilling, Portland, Oregon, which, not the best wording, but this is a good example of things that you can do to make your product different. Nobody else is finishing their MGP rye in Gary Oak casks.
True? Well,
That
I would
puts
assume
your
that's
mark
true.
on
I
it.
haven't checked that, but I would assume that's true.
I mean, it
There's
may have
few enough
changed
there's
since.
few enough distillers. There's one barrel producer that's making Gary Oak.
Yep.
Gary Oak, at least in Washington, and also known as Quercus Garyana, so we're not just making a Pokemon joke.
Yes.
Although I always giggle when
I
somebody
have.
says Gary Oak. Um,
I,
so
I I made a Pokemon joke to Joe once, and he just sighed.
yeah, I'm
I
sure they
thought it
get that
was
a lot.
funny.
So as far as
Yeah.
I know, there is one barrel producer in Oregon and maybe one barrel producer in Washington that are making Quercus Garyana barrels. In Washington, at least, Quercus Garyana is endangered, and so you can only use wood that has fallen naturally to make those barrels, which means the wood is exceptionally rare to begin with. Um,
Yes.
so there are few enough distilleries using Quercus Garyana oak barrels at all, let alone finishing MGP products.
Yes. And this definitely. I mean, I have had so much MGP rye that I can actually pick it out in a lineup. Granted, I can pick it out in a lineup of rice that I have on hand, which means like mostly Kentucky
It's
Creek
not fully
Buckland
blind.
is. It's not fully blind, but I can pick out the MGP examples, and I can definitely tell that this is MGP, but they do a good job of adding their own twist and making it their own, and that's the important part of sourcing. That is the hurdle that a lot of distilleries have difficulty with, at least initially. Um, and like Sagamore Spirit is blending their own distillate with MGP now, but for a long time, Sagamore Spirit was just a blend of the two MGP rye mash bills, which made it kind of a hard to justify pickup for a while. Um, and that's not entirely fair. It is good whiskey. It's made by people who care about what they're doing and are doing their best to blend to the profile of their whiskey. But, you know, It's I've got so much MGP whiskey just by dint of so much of the affordable mid-shelf rise are MGP.
Yep. And by contrast, once I realized that MGP whiskey was a very common thing in a bunch of different brands, and that I didn't particularly like many of the expressions of MGP, I almost went out of my way to stop getting it. Not entirely. There are good examples, but it's just not something I want to pack my shelves with.
Right. And that stuff is actually really interesting. I need to make sure that they're still in business.
What, MGP? I
Because
think MGP is okay.
oh no, I meant East Side.
Yeah, okay.
Because every once in a while I'll discover that I've been meaning to pick that up, or oh, that looks interesting. I'll pick that up next time. Oh, they're out of business.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be a shame. There was I ordered from Sealbox, I think.
Mhm,
A can't remember what the brand was, but there was an American single malt that was being made in West Portland. Um,
mhm.
that they went out of business during the pandemic, and Sealbox still had a listing for their American single malt. I placed an order. It was a half-size bottle too, so I think their production was probably pretty small. I placed an
Yeah.
order, and then a week or so later, I got an email from Sealbox saying, "Oh, actually, we've run out of inventory of that, and the distillery is closed, so we can't get any more. Um, like, what do you want to do?" And so
Yeah.
I just took the refund. It was a little disappointing though because that would have been an opportunity to try a whiskey that was relatively hard to get.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up again the, support craft distillers now, because if you don't, they won't get a chance to be bigger.
Yeah. And
Like,
I don't know how many casualties there were in terms of craft distilling during the pandemic, but there were certainly, when it became hard to sell whiskey, there were a lot of distilleries in danger. The government actually made it, I don't know if this was a Washington government thing or a federal government thing, maybe Texas, I think also because of family there, where they actually made it so that distilleries can ship direct to consumer at least within the same state, which
it
was
was
previously not a thing as much.
it's something that happened in a number of states. There are still some states where it isn't a thing. In Virginia, it is now a thing, and it about halfway through 2021, I want to say they made it possible to ship direct to consumers for in-state producers. So, like, I could order from Catoctin Creek, Cashel, KO Distilling. I still can, which is nice. I may or may not definitely utilize that to get my hands on things that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get. Um, but there was at least one distillery in Virginia that closed its doors as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and it it was down to um, Becky Harris and the people of the Craft Distillers Association um, fighting for the various aspects of spirits industry that kept a lot of distilleries from closing, um, because they managed to get fees waived for product that went to creating hand sanitizer, and it was a fight that Becky Harris and a lot of the people in that organization just worked around the clock to achieve. And if they hadn't achieved it, it would have killed a bunch of distillers. And there was a scare um, after the government said, okay, well, you're all good, where distilleries got a tax bill for things for spirit that got turned into hand sanitizer, that then they had to go and fight the government on again because they had been promised that it wouldn't be taxed, because that was stuff that they were usually either giving away or selling at cost of production to state agencies, school systems, other businesses, just trying to keep doors open, uh, uh, providing supplies to first responders, and that sort of thing. And I know that if one distillery in Virginia closed its doors, there are absolutely distilleries all over the place that were in a fragile point in their development that did not survive.
Yeah.
And that's people's whose dreams are no more.
Yep.
Because you don't get into distilling, especially not craft distilling, because it seems like a good money making opportunity. You get into it because you love it. And that theory's borne out by my conversations with Joe and other people in the industry.
Yep. I mean, yeah. So you've got a few people in the craft spirits industry who came to the Whiskey Lodge, which, it's not huge. It's we've got almost 1,000 members, I think. Um,
A little over 1,000.
oh, a little over 1,000 now. We've been growing.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I
We're
joined the
growing.
team, when I joined the mod team, I think we were concerned about getting to 300. And there just has been a steady march of progress. The longer we're around, the more people find us.
Mm-hmm.
It's a growing community. We've got some craft distillers in there, and the reason they show up is not to ply their wares, right? They're not there shilling their whiskey all the time. In fact, they rarely talk about it. We
Mm-hmm.
tag them. We know who they are. Like, hey,
Yeah,
Joe, I tried your latest eau de vie of like pear eau de vie. It's delicious,
which I
right?
want to try.
Or
I want to try that.
yeah, Caitlin. We tag Adam from Lost Lantern whenever we
Oh
try
yeah.
his new products. Um,
We actually have. I don't know if he's still active. I need to look it up. We did at one point have a distiller from South Africa.
there is a distiller from Eastern China, I believe, not Taiwan.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
he's a I
Um,
I don't know the details on that one. I think he's a bar owner and he has like a small distilling operation for the bar.
and he also does some independent bottling,
Oh
which
yes,
which is an
of other
interesting
producers'
twist.
spirits. Yeah, yeah. So like
Yes.
Lost Lantern's an independent bottler, and there
Yes.
are there are a lot of small independent bottlers. Actually, there's a podcast called The Sporkful. Um, Again,
That
by
is a
the
great
way,
name.
big asterisk. We're still not sponsored by anybody. We talk
Yeah.
about the stuff we love because we think it's good and we want people to find it. By the way, per the previous conversation, if you love your local craft spirits, get on the internet and advertise for them because
Oh yeah. Yeah.
guarantee you they can use the word of mouth. And so that's one of the reasons that we're doing what we do here and talking about the brands that we love. So there's a podcast called The Sporkful, and I couldn't possibly remember the name of the episode at this point, but try to go find it. Maybe I'll see if I can find it and put a link in the description of the YouTube video when this goes up. Um, where basically some listeners wrote, I think it was listeners, some listeners wrote in and said like, hey, we just inherited this wonky bottle of scotch. We can't find any information about where it came from, whatever. And the gist of it was that through following a trail of breadcrumbs, it turns out that it was independently bottled from a single cask of scotch by a like an innkeeper, like a bar
Ooh.
and inn motel sort of thing, um, which had gone out of business. It was no longer a business, which is
Yeah.
why nobody could match up the address with a whiskey
Yeah.
producer, because this bottle was maybe 40 years old or something like that. So the address was like, well, that's just some random business, and we don't recognize any of the names on any of this stuff. And it was an interesting piece of investigative journalism about independent bottling and how sometimes very small those operations can be.
Oh yeah. Um. There's so the White Horse is a brand of blended Scotch that got its start because there was a White Horse Inn and Tavern in Scotland that was on one of the big roads. It was a popular waypoint, and they discovered that it would be more cost efficient for them to buy in malt and grain whiskey and blend it themselves rather than buying from a blending house. And apparently, for a while, they would also sell you just straight from the cask in the basement, a single malt. Which, I mean, that those days are long gone, but
Yeah.
that's sort of
And the
like
White
where a
Horse,
lot of
by
these
the
companies
way,
started.
the White Horse, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, is the independent bottler that's closely associated with very old Lagavulin, correct?
I don't think so, but I don't know for sure. I know that they are currently owned by somebody else, and they are a sort of budget blend.
Okay.
Um,
I'll do some fact checking on that and I'll maybe put some information in the description.
yeah, I mean, it's just I know that story because I found a White Horse tin and I looked them up because I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
You know, that's not a brand that I'd ever heard of. Um, but it was literally like a tavern owner and one of his bartenders blended whiskey to sell and got good enough at it that they started to sell to other businesses. And that's kind of cool in and of itself. Um, and, you know, there's a lot of talk about non-distiller producers or NDPs in the US that are, well, like we were talking about earlier, just sourcing MGP. And I think that there's a growing trend towards sort of a more Scottish style independent bottler, like Lost Lantern. I'm not insinuating that they're copying the Scots. I'm just saying that, you know, similar pattern of bottling from a known source and taking a great deal of pride in highlighting the source because they're
Honestly, we can do a whole episode about independent bottling. It's a fascinating
yeah,
topic, and
we probably should.
there's a lot of independent bottlers to talk about, a lot to recommend. Um,
Yes.
and the interesting thing, I think a good takeaway from any mention of independent bottlers are sometimes, and there's various reasons that independent bottlers have a market at all. But one of the
Mhm.
reasons is that independent bottlers often find high quality whiskey that simply did not fit into the portfolio of the producer. And they
Yes.
acquire that and they like it. And because they like it, they sell it on to the consumer. And we, as consumers, as interested, geeky, nerdy types who want to experience more of a different distillery or have good whiskey for not quite so expensive, get the opportunity to try these things that otherwise would not have
Mhm.
seen the light of day. And that is a great service to the industry.
Yes. Um, and like every once in a while, you'll see a signatory or a Graham and McPhail or a Hunter Lang that is a mystery Speyside, mystery Highland, mystery Isla, etc. That's because it's something that is so wildly outside the wheelhouse of the distiller that initially produced it that they aren't really comfortable putting their name on it. But it's high enough quality that the independent bottler is willing to stake a claim on it and put their name on it. And that makes those worth the while of trying. And I've encountered occasionally people who say that I avoid the mystery ones because no one's willing to put their name on that. And that's just not the case. Like
It's just that sometimes these things might hurt the branding of the portfolio just by being different because a lot of consumers, uh, it's hard, I guess it's probably hard for people like us to relate, to be
yeah,
quite honest, because after years of collecting dozens of bottles and experiencing so many different things, we've forgotten what it's like to be so-called normal consumers.
yeah,
The typical consumer finds something they like and they want to rely on that thing being the same so they can come back to it time and time
yes.
again. In that
And
context, if a distillery were to release something that is wildly off profile, not bad, not off as in bad tasting, but off profile as in outside of what they normally would produce, the
like for
consumers would just be
example,
turned off of that.
um this is a slightly different sort of context because it's Ardbeg, and Ardbeg fanboys will buy anything with that A on it. Um,
It is a nice A.
Ard, it is a very nice A.
That
Ardbeg,
that's kind of a weird joke I just said by accident.
um, Ardbeg released an unpeated expression. I want to say early 2000s, mid 2000s, sometime when they
That
were.
Their peat
sort
machine
of.
was on the fritz. They just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Um, and I really wanted a bottle. And I mean, this is like 5 years after the fact that I've discovered this, and I'm going, that sounds wild. I want to try that. I want to know what that is. And it apparently wasn't super popular outside of the like Ardbeg fanboy sort of space. Um, so they never did it again.
Hmm.
And now to get a bottle of that, which retailed initially for like $100 because it's Ardbeg, is like literally $1,000.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
And
Anything from Ardbeg
yeah,
that's 5 years old and allocated in the sense that there was not very much of it is gonna be crazy expensive these days. Go hit the
yeah,
auctions and pray for somebody not noticing the bottle being there to get a good price.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, but one of the things that was interesting about that to me was they did it once. It wasn't particularly well received, and they went, lesson learned. We're not going to do that again.
hmm.
And it's so much of a this is our brand, this is what we stick to. We're not going to stray outside of that. That like it it's kind of disappointing that you don't get to see these people stretch their legs and be like, hey, you know what we usually do? Yeah, we wanted to try something different. So here's this on top of our usual releases. Here's something that's different. And it, I mean, sometimes that is oh, hey, we release something that's finished in an interesting cask. Like, I'm trying to think of if I've got anything like that. I mean, I've got Lefroy Cask, Catoctin Creek, but they don't really trade on this is our style, we don't vary from it. Um, I know I don't have anything that really is a mold breaker for the brand, unfortunately.
This is actually a great segue to the interview that I did earlier today. If you wouldn't mind me taking over this
Yes,
conversation real quick.
yes.
So Copperworks is, I would say, almost famous for the fact that almost every release they've released has been a numbered, there's their webcam, has been a numbered release. Like this one is number 046, and they intended to keep numbering their releases for so long that they've always put 3 digits on the bottle because their
Right.
intention was to produce good liquid, good flavors, regardless of consistency from batch to batch, regardless of whether they vary. Like everything they do is an experiment until they come up
Yeah.
to something. Now they are increasing their capacity in various ways, and the interview will go into detail about them, about the various ways in which they're increasing capacity. One of the things which I almost didn't expect, but I was going to ask about, and Jason preempted my question, um, they are actually moving towards uh, having what you might call a flagship release of
Oh, interesting.
not one, but two different flagship releases. One of which is the sort of more typical profile that they get out of their number two or number three char refill American oak uh, for like 3, 4 years old, maybe 5 years old, and sort of like a blend profile that they are able to more or less reliably produce, uh, unpeated. And then of course Copperworks has peated whiskey from the Skagit Valley Malting Washington State Skagit Valley peat,
Hmm.
right? American peat, not Scottish peat distilled in America.
That sounds cool. I want to try
American
it.
peat, peated whiskey. It actually is.
I want
So
to try it.
also, they are sold out. This was their first release of American peated whiskey, 42. Um, and I had mentioned to Jason before the interview that I was not able to get to Copperworks in time to buy a bottle of this, which is totally on me because they had it for quite a while. Um, and he sent me home with a little 100 milliliter sample of that they had left over. And
Ooh.
we shared a dram of that. So there's only about 50 milliliters left now. Um, so the texture of this is definitely influenced by the presence of the peat. The peat itself is incredibly mild. Um, both in terms of it's only maybe 5 ppm is what he said if they had to guess. I think they sent a sample to Scotland to be tested with their same equipment. Um, so like a very mildly peated whiskey. But on top of that, it's a very different profile of whiskey, not the
Mhm.
same, peat comes from the plants in the area. And the plants, the flora that lives
Right,
in Skagit Valley is
which is
very different.
why
Yeah. So you almost wouldn't recognize
um
this.
just to interject
Yeah.
because
Yeah. I think we're delayed a little bit, so
um
go ahead. I'll wait for you to.
one thing that is oh sorry one of the big things that creates a difference between Highland peat and Isla peat is that difference in flora. Like Highland peat is woodier because it's from old forests and bog life, whereas the peat on Isla and other islands is more from like scrub and the salt washed stuff, and it's a much more medicinal, briny, uh, some would say gross character.
Yep. And there's a lot of people who don't like peat because they think that's all it is. The super smoky, super swampy medicinal Band-Aid, tire fire, rubber, tar, those sorts of notes that you would associate with Isla peat is not necessarily the full story with peat. Um, there's also, Japanese peated whiskey, which has a different kind of profile too. This one, as I remarked to Jason, you almost wouldn't know that this was peated unless you were to compare it to another Copperworks, basically, because it is that mild. Um, it's just this very, like, very mild campfire background note, and the rest of it is a texture that sort of serves as like uh, a palette, a canvas upon which to put other flavors that sort of stick better than they would otherwise. It's sort of like I wouldn't even say normally I'll say mild peat kind of tastes earthy. I wouldn't even say that necessarily here. It tastes of flora, but it's more of a texture. Uh, and that's just so interesting. But anyway, back onto the point. Copperworks is planning on converging on batch release that is meant to be a more or less consistent profile, both an unpeated version and a peated version, because they were part of developing the Skagit Valley peat along with Westland. And Westland gets the credit for starting that whole thing, and Copperworks loves to let everybody know that at every opportunity, partly because they feel they're indebted to them, which I think is reasonable for just getting the whole thing started right. Like, don't claim credit for somebody else's good work, but also take credit for the good work that you did, right? And Copperworks was in fact the first commercially available American peated whiskey, let alone Skagit Valley, Washington State, Pacific Northwest, America in general. This is the first time American peat has been used to peat a whiskey, an American single malt, just in time for the relatively speaking, just in time for the American single malt regulations to come out, which was great timing. Um, so I'm excited for that. And I think it does show like a real sign of growth, like moving beyond the 6 barrel batches and moving to something that is perhaps a better price point, more consistent flavor, something that the average consumer can come back to time and time again and expect it to be more or less the same, knowing there may still be some variation, but still, that's it's good to see. Most distilleries end up like their off-profile stuff is the more
Mhm.
unusual things. They'll release single casks, whatever. Copperworks started as small batch and single casks always, and they're only just now, years later, their second fill barrels are not even mature yet, right? They've done first fill fresh barrels. They've done ex bourbon. They're now using those first fill barrels again, and they're just about ready to release as a whiskey, right? In these maybe 6 years, I don't actually remember when Copperworks was founded, which I feel bad. I should have done my homework. Um, it's been years, and they are only just now getting around to a size where they want to be producing a consistent product, as opposed to the most flavorful or most interesting product they have on hand now, as a result of all the good hard work they've done and the aging for years and finding the stuff that's really great. Um, I have that interview. I need to send it to you guys so you can listen to it, get it edited and sent out to the world. We could probably talk a little bit more, debrief a little bit on the interview, and do maybe kind of a commentary edit or something like that, depending on how it works. We're still developing our content format. I want to say, I thought that this was going to be a
Yes.
45-minute no agenda call, and we've been on for just about 2.5 hours now. This has been a wonderful time, but
Yeah, sorry.
I am well past very talked out now, and I'm sure the audience has also gotten tired of listening to us go on and on. This is probably going to have to get segmented up into a few different videos, to be honest. We've done pretty major topic
Yeah.
shifts here. With all that said, I don't have any whiskey in my glass, so I should pour something because it's bad luck to cheers without. So I'll go back to the copperworks I was having earlier. Pour myself a dram.
Beautiful cork sound.
Thank you. I have a bad habit of licking the drip off my glass after I pour. Maybe not. Maybe a delicious habit. And I also smell
Waste
my
not, want
hands
not.
because. Yep. Well, Phill, and in watching back, you'll see it too, Spooky. Cheers, sláinte. See you next time.
Sláinte.